about it and everything in general.
Okay.
If anyone didn't bring an outline or a feedback form, they're in the back. You can pick one up.
Stealing my speech. Welcome, everybody. This is the Town Center Forum. It's the discussion of the goals, the challenges, and recommendations for our town center. It's one of a series of forums. I think most of you know, but I'll just review. It's one of a series of forums of the major sections of the new general plan, and we'll review the guiding principles, the process, the timeline, kind of where we are, and then the organization and the standardized format used in the plan, and then we'll present each goal of the town center section. That's why you're here. This is being televised, and it's a public meeting, so I'm John Higley, I'm the chairman of the planning board, so I'll call our meeting in session. We've had a very thoughtful and very useful input in the past forums and discussions, and we certainly look forward to more tonight. I'll remind you, I think everyone here is well experienced, but we'll follow the usual meeting rules to identify yourself and yourself and your address, and then we should have plenty of time for the discussion of each goal. The presentation outline is on the town website, and the slides will be on the town website. There's also a feedback form and a sign-in. So if there should be copies for everybody, but and if you're watching, all this stuff will be available online. And this is hosted by the planning board and sponsored by all of you. So we're looking for ways to word things better, and that's one, I think, that the sponsor of all this is everyone in Sherborn. So the purpose of the general plan is to provide a vision of where we want to be in 30 years and guide the decision-making all along the way to make sure that the big decisions and the little decisions are steering us in the direction we want to go. This is Sherborn's plan. It needs to be useful and practical. So your being here is just what it needs. So thank you again. There's no shortcuts. It's designed to follow the process of the Sherborn's laws and regulations, the committee and board hearings and meetings and town meeting. The plan begins with these guiding principles, and the working groups that started this spent quite a bit of time discussing the guiding principles, and they're worth reviewing. The guiding principles are, first, to preserve Sherborn's most valued assets: the excellent schools, clean water resources, and healthy, resilient forests, rural environment, farms, trails, open space, historic assets, and scenic roads, while working toward positive change. The world's changing, and we want to guide it as best we can. The financial stability of the town, the greater diversity of housing options, and the vibrant, attractive, walkable town center on a village scale. So the plan begins with these guiding principles, and they should be used as a reality check for everything we do tonight and throughout the plan. So this is the timeline. This is where we began the process with a townwide survey. It's really a homegrown plan. It's being built on the foundation of the 2001 plan, and it's using the experience of that plan to write this plan. We certainly borrow heavily on other plans, including open space and most recently housing production, with a lot of input from you folks, from groups and committees. So this is the timeline of where we are. The revisions to the text, data, the implementation, our target is to finish that this year and present it to the town at our annual town meeting next year. Okay, so the major sections, land use, housing, town center, circulation, natural resources, cultural and recreation, and fiscal and economic. The land use and zoning is really an introduction and overview, so there's no recommendations in that section. That's really an overview, but the recommendations for land use and zoning are in a lot of the they're in a lot of the sections elsewhere in the general plan. The same thing is really true with the financial and economic. So that's the organization, and this is the structure that is being used in all the goals, in all the sections. And it begins with the broad goals that really have to be consistent with the guiding principles, the recommendations, the strategies and specific actions. The implementation is key. The responsibility and timing and the resources and the tracking and measurement are all really important to a useful plan. And the real measure is the plan's got to be useful. So again, putting time into this is important. But this is the standard format that's being used in all the sections. So moving on to the town center goals. Goal 1 is to preserve the most valued features of the existing town center. Goal 2 is to enhance the vitality and function of the town center through incremental improvements. Goal 3 is to support the current businesses and consider new business and housing opportunities in the town center within the existing infrastructure constraints. Goal 4 is to develop a realistic plan for the town center that addresses those challenges that are selected for action but not met by the incremental changes in goals 1 through 3. So that's a wording change that there's some changes in the wording here, but that's something we really worked on in response to the input we've had in the past. And then goal 5 is to implement that comprehensive plan that includes those goals that are agreed on. So it's very sequential. And you'll see that as we go through these goals. So, goal 1. Goal 1 is the vision for goal 1 is for the town center to maintain its legacy as a historic rural village with an eclectic mix of municipal buildings, churches, homes, recreation sites, and views into the fields and forests. It's really to preserve those most valued assets. So that's the goal. Now let's look at the challenges that we face with those. Most of the town center properties are privately owned and not controlled by the town. That's a challenge. Next is the historic district. Does not apply to all the historic buildings in the town center, and the National Register designation provides limited protection. The next is some of the existing businesses and services may face market challenges that we want to address. One we all know is the heavy traffic and congestion. I can speak to that today. So the heavy traffic, there's a great picture of Sherborn at about 1900 with dirt roads and not a person in sight, saying a typical busy day in Sherborn. So times have changed. There's widely different visions of the ideal town center, and that's something I'm hopeful there'll always be widely different visions, but the goal here is to come to an agreement on that vision. So the recommendations for goal 1 is to actively promote and preserve the selected historic private properties in the town center that are part of Sherborn's story. So that's giving them sort of added emphasis and support. A lot of these things in the preservation section there's a lot of things already installed. There's a lot of things that have been done. So the mention here is really reflecting that and looking for ways to build on it. The next is to maintain historic buildings and structures like the building we're in, the community center, the cemetery, the town pound. So in these first two sections, we're really talking about the homes and former houses that are used as businesses, the churches, and these municipal buildings. We want to preserve. The next is the integration of the recreation fields and the resources and activities in the town center. And everybody thinks of the ball fields and things like that. Because of my kids, I think of catching the frogs in the pond right next to it. But those are things that I think are important assets. In my family, they're considered historic. Most people would probably just think they're nice, and cultural and natural and environmental. But they need to be preserved, and we'll speak to that in much greater detail. So maintaining the town's center streets at their current scale and feel. We all want to keep the scale and feel of our village, and maintaining the streets is an important part. We'll speak to it later, but there's a very current aspect that just happened in our Complete Streets. Sherborn applied for it and was accepted as a Complete Streets program in the state. And the first part of that was we looked at a draft just recently that was considering, among other things, considering ways to narrow the streets, make the amount of pavement that has to be crossed by a pedestrian or bicycle less, and also just narrowing it visually with lining, with striping and things like that as some strategies, not just to control speeds, but also to make it more like what it was 100 years ago when it was a dirt road. You could walk around here safely, to improve safety. So those are things that are being looked at from a scale and field status. The next thing is establishing a design review guidelines for renovations and also new buildings and structures in the town center to ensure they're consistent with that village character. And this is something that we don't have design guidelines that are specifically used, and the details of this include forming a design guideline process to adopt and implement those things. That's part of the details that have to get looked at, that are looked at in the strategies and specific actions. So these are the recommendations for the preservation of the valued features of the town center. This is not in the town center section, but it's well worth looking at, because this is a section from another part of the general plan in the cultural resources section, and there's a great deal of overlap in a lot of different parts of the plan, and making sure we're consistent is really valuable. So when we looked at the town center, the job was a lot easier because of the work done by in the cultural resources historic section. These are their recommendations for preserving Sherborn's historic and cultural assets. The historic district, there's a great deal of overlapping commonality with the town center, of course. So the recommendations here are very, very relevant. And I think a key part of this is promoting the awareness and appreciation, and then looking at local governance and bylaws to strengthen the ability to preserve the existing assets, and expand the local and state designations in order to, again, educate and promote, and then protect and maintain the public assets over the long term. So these are the goals in the historic preservation section that are very, very relevant to the first goal in the town center. The next is to talk about goal 2, and I'll turn this over to Marion, and I'll be your projectionist.
Okay, thanks, John. Yeah. Goal 2 goes a baby step further, looking at small changes that can be made in the town center to make it a socially and recreationally more vital and more useful to town residents and more friendly to visitors. So these are small changes that wouldn't shake the world, but I think, I should say the land use group that worked hard on this and the built environment group that worked hard on this were quite enthusiastic about the things that could be done in town center just to make it a more livable place. First of all, the first, I should go to the vision, our vision for the town center. Oh, I think you have a previous version of the plan. Anyway, that's fine. The vision for the town center is that it'll be a social gathering place that's easy to walk around in and pleasant to be in and has a visual sense of place that we're all proud of. So the recommendations required for this are the challenges. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. We know the challenges. I don't have to reiterate these for you. We don't have enough safe walkways and crosswalks. It's not that easy to walk around town center to link the residences and businesses and public buildings. So we get in our car and we drive from one building to another, which is kind of crazy given how small the center is. There aren't enough outdoor resting and gathering places where people can just informally meet and run into each other and hang out for a little while. There are very few sources of information in the town center. If a visitor comes to town, they have even town residents have no idea where the trails are or where the historic assets are or where the good bike routes are. Those are not easy to find. We could make it a lot easier. And of course, there's no publicly accessible restrooms. There are informally accessible restrooms at Rose's Garage, at the Heritage. It's very welcoming to people needing to use the restroom, but for the public, it's a problem in general. And finally, there are no marked bike lanes or obvious ways to bike through town safely. So let's get to the recommendations. You may think of other challenges that I haven't mentioned, but we want to cover some of these in our recommendations. The first is simple: create a more walkable town center. And this, as you see in your outline, would involve improving and adding to sidewalks and crosswalks, preferably on both sides of the main street so it's easy to get around, particularly in South Town Center to get across from the businesses to the library and town buildings would be great. And then we need paths that allow people to walk from North to South Town Center and maybe around Town Center by alternate routes, not necessarily right up against the busy road. For example, possibly I have a slide here that can illustrate Town Center. You can see Pine Hill up the upper right, a walking path that goes, say, behind the ball fields and somehow connects all the way down to the library and town buildings would be great. And on the other side, it would be possible to make a walking path, possibly from Hunting Lane along behind the properties. Of course, there are lots of obstacles, and I'm sure you can think of some, but it would be nice to walk without being right on the road. And then we'd like to improve the safety for walking, make the crosswalks wider, more visible, and you upgrade our design standards for crosswalks. And then linking to the trail systems would be great. We talked about this in the recreation system, in the recreation section. I'm going to go ahead to this. If you look on the right, the Bay Circuit Trail and some of the beautiful town trails come very near to Town Center. But if you're in Town Center, you'd never know it. So linkages and signage could be much better. So to go back.
No, you flipped.
Should I go back one more?
No, whatever you want.
Okay. Social gathering places. The Built Environment Group.
Yeah, Marion, we lost our map.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Not that we really need it, but it's nice to have it.
That's Sherborn, is it?
There.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sherborn.
Right.
That's I do.
So, social gathering places like little pocket parks outside, just as you're walking through center, a comfortable, inviting place to sit down and meet or not. Nice meeting places, both indoors and outdoors, that are easily accessible, and restroom facilities that are more obvious and easier to find and publicly accessible. That is a wish that many people have mentioned. And then other resources. Car parking is very disjointed now. It would be better to have parking that is visible, makes more sense, so you can park in one place and walk around town center. Informational kiosks would help to solve the visitor and resident information problem, showing bike routes, trails, etc. And more information could be available in digital form on the town website, or Sherborn Walks by Sherborn Forest and Trail is coming out in digital form. We could use more of that. And then how we can solve the restroom problem, which is a drag on businesses and residents within the existing infrastructure. We need to be more creative about that. Then town center roadways and sidewalks. John referred to this in the circulation of town center. We need to think more carefully about how to facilitate flow of traffic, even though we don't want it to go faster. We want it to go safely. Left turn lanes would certainly help the businesses at certain points, so they can get in and out of shops without spending 45 minutes waiting. And sidewalks, possible lane closures. Those are the kinds of actions that we recommended for Goal 2. So at this point, I should probably stop.
Well, I've been not scrolling through all the recommendations, so let me do that.
Oh,
So we started with creating a more walkable town center, making the town center more bike-friendly, enabling social gathering, improving the resources and amenities, and encouraging continuation and expansion of multiple uses. And then improving the existing town center roadways and sidewalks. So you've touched on all of those. What's best, to go to?
I think we should open it up and
Yeah,
see if there are any comments.
This was something we talked about it a lot, so if folks have any comments, now's a good time. If you agree with everything, then I want to adjourn the meeting right now.
I just have one. My name is Josh. I'm not a resident, but I do work in Sherborn. I'm one of the owners of Heritage of Sherborn. And we've been to a few of these meetings. We've had some at the restaurant. And we were, I guess we're sort of a de facto town center, I guess, where everyone sort of met there long before we were involved and sort of continued on. And we enjoy that part of it, and we'd like to contribute more to that in any ways. The bathrooms, feel free to use the bathrooms anytime you want. We hold no restrictions to anybody, as long as you can get in the building or sneak around the back and walk through the kitchen if you need to. And so, the development that's possibly going on in town, we really support bringing more business to the town, figure it's more of a destination. More people stay in town and do business in town. I think it's better. Anyway, we can increase our business is obviously better, but I think it also supports the town in our taxes that we pay as well. And one area that we've talked about, community, I guess we sort of talked a little bit recently about using more of our land, our free land that we only use really infrequently for usually weddings and in the summer. We put out games and stuff for kids, but inviting sort of more music outside. Right now, we're not allowed to have music outside for our weddings or really anything. We're not allowed to have a harp. We're not allowed to have a clarinet or a triangle. So we'd like to do something more for the town and utilize that lawn more. Whether it's, we talked about maybe doing a farmer's market there or a craft market or something that people would support. I think some of the local farmers may be finding it a little too much for them right now because they are small. but something along those lines. And I think the live music for us, not an every night thing, but once during the summer thing, when we really slow down and the town becomes even more sleepy to get some more people out there and sort of have a feeling of a more destination spot for people to come to. And the ability, obviously, for the weddings and stuff, I'd like to sort of figure out a way to do that with the town that everyone, or almost everyone will be happy.
Thank you. Other comments?
Well, I mean, it's a small thing, but I mean, this idea of paving a path behind the Pine Hill School and connecting it with the south center of town, I mean, that's a fairly heavy idea if one thinks of the route, the swamp, the one has to go through, and the hills, and the idea of connecting Pine Hill School with Lake Street, and there's a nice path that exists there now. The idea of paving that path is nothing short of
You didn't say
grotesque.
paving.
With Lake Street?
Nobody said
No,
paving.
it says, yeah, connecting, yeah, linking North Main Street and Lake Street, Pine Hill School. I mean, and whatever, it's a small issue,
Yeah.
but whoever thought this out does not have
Well, we need to take another look at that and make sure we have it right because, and as I said, there are plenty of obstacles, but the idea is to make an alternative way to get through town. It's just something to think about.
yeah, no,
And we also, choked on some of the obstacles that came up, but it still is a nice idea.
well, just getting a sidewalk on the east side would be a miraculous achievement, I think.
That's true.
And we're waiting a long time for that to happen, as a first step to connecting the north and the south.
Yeah.
That's important too, absolutely.
Thank you, Laney. Susie?
You mentioned parking and making people aware of where there is parking. Is there any sort of a parking map of Sherborn? I have to say, I wouldn't be able to tell you where parking, if I want to park my car, other than, the very few places that I do go. I wouldn't know where. Is there any sort of map like that?
I don't think as a,
Have you attempted to map it?
I don't think, we have mapped for discussion purposes, but not for the communication purposes that you're suggesting. That's a good idea.
So you actually know where these underutilized spaces are, but we don't necessarily.
Yeah, but then if I
That's
tell
right.
you, then where am I going to put it? But that's a good point.
Good
Yeah.
point, Susie.
Yeah.
There's one more comment.
Oh, sorry. Eric?
Was there any discussion on relocating the fire station? Because the fire station is nice public facility, but it is in a very valuable commercial location, which actually could thrive if utilized for commercial purposes.
It's been mentioned, but it's not in this plan. Yeah.
So it might make, like, for example, if it was someone incorporated on Butler Street, the C&D garage, something like that, that can kind of be, actually have resources right there. And if that was some kind of other commercial facility, it would actually help just more people downtown and just more vitality, like you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
It's not a source of people or tax revenue, it would actually be a source of tax revenue as well.
Yeah.
One of the smaller comments I had, just is I'd caution you against turn lanes, things that widen a roadway cross-section or widen it by 11 feet are going to change an appearance of downtown. They'll help traffic flow, but they'll also impact walkability, as it'll actually eliminate natural breaks you have in traffic. Just a small.
Yeah. Again, look, it's timely because these are specific issues that are being discussed now in this complete streets thing. So we're looking forward to using that as a key piece of the circulation section of the general plan. So that'll be coming out soon, and hope to get that kind of feedback. Yes.
I always think of the modernity issue, and I think the more we can use the digital space to get information across, the better. I mean, there's nothing like a kiosk that nobody has been paying attention to. You really need somebody, you need a kiosk manager to be hired once you have a kiosk, because you can leave something up there for months. So doing things digitally, I think, is a really good solution, because nowadays, certainly people younger than I, they get all their information that way. So I think it's good to think of continually updating the website and adding things like maps and indications of things going on. And
Right, thanks. That is one of the things we mentioned, but maybe too briefly, but you're right, it's really important.
I have a question, Marion. You said that public restrooms, enabling us to have more of them would be within the infrastructure. Does that mean you would not have to add water and sewer?
There would be a possibility. We'd have to figure it out. Obviously, I don't have the answer to exactly how that would be done or where would be best, but I think it's something we have to look into to see if we can increase amenities even if we don't have town water and sewer.
Also, I wondered about areas for bike traffic, because I know that many times that is just kind of a joke, because they'll put the bike lane right in the middle of the traffic lane, and it's just totally useless. And I'm wondering where we would possibly have room to put bike lanes.
In the center of town. Yeah, they would have to be along the side, but John's more of an expert on this, but one thing that we have recommended is that we consider opening sidewalks to bike traffic. If they're not heavily used for walkers, if we limit speed of the bikes to, say, 10 miles an hour or something slow enough so that it's not dangerous, just to allow bikes to get through town safely. But I'll turn it over to John because
Well,
he's the
I'll just
street
make one
guy.
comment about that I used to drive people nuts by saying sharrows. But sharrows are actually, what you see on the roads now, they're arrows and a silhouette of a bicycle rider, and it's painted on the road. And it reminds us car drivers that there's bicycles to share the road. And it also reminds bicyclists they need to stay to the side. So it's used regionally and actually nationally. You'll see it more and more. And that's really the key thing, is it's being done all around us. So we're getting more educated about it. The education process for the bicycle rider and for the motor vehicle driver, there's a lot of education. But those are signs that are used, meaning to share the road. Most people do, but it's a nice reminder. So in our town center, I don't think there's room for, it'd be nice, I would really like it, but I don't know that there's room within the town center paved section to create separate bike lanes. I don't think so. So having these silhouettes painted, and you see them in really pretty much every town around us, and throughout Metro West and really the state, now to share the road. And it's just a reminder of sort of etiquette, but it actually has been very effective.
Do you think so? Because it seems to me as though it's kind of broken.
Well, is it token? It's that education process. If we don't use it in town, it means we're missing out on what the other towns are doing, and it means it's slower. People are less likely to make use of that. There's other things that can be done as well that are just simply saying we're a bicycle-friendly town, and things like that. At some intersections where there's a stop line, for a pedestrian or a bicycle, some intersections have a lot of pavement. So as a pedestrian walking down the sidewalk, you really have to walk across a very large intersection to get to the other side of that intersection. So some things are done is to actually take away some of that pavement. And it makes it a sharper turn, which slows motor vehicles down, but it means there's less traffic for a pedestrian or a bicycle to cross. Those things are very effective. We have to make sure that fire trucks and vehicles can make the turn. Yeah.
Bob Delaney, 46 Pleasant Street. In regard to sidewalks in the center of town, it's really pretty unattractive to walk on our sidewalks in the center of town because of so much traffic. And people coming from, whether it's Leland Farms or any place in town, they're heading someplace, and they're not out for a walk. So off-road bicycle and walking paths would be very popular. I know the trails around us are used by off-road bikes, that sort of thing, and they're popular and they're used. And that's the direction, I think, if we want to make the town more bike-friendly or people-friendly, that's the direction we should be.
I agree.
Yeah, thanks.
Other comments? So
Well-
this goal is to enhance the town center vitality and function, and it's within these constraints that we have. So the third goal is looking at business and housing opportunities within the existing infrastructure constraints. Marion, are you going to do this, and I'll do a better job with projection?
Yeah, I'll do this. That's a deal. The third goal kind of moves from, the second goal is more about the resident, the visitor, the human experience. The third goal is about our businesses and our possibilities for housing in the town center. Within our existing infrastructure, what can be done to support the current businesses and to enable any new ones that want to come in within the constraints that we have. So the vision is that we'll have a variety of successful small businesses in a visually attractive, user-friendly environment. And the variety of businesses are, of course, dictated by what the current market is. For example, retail is in decline, but small restaurants are on the upswing. And the kinds of things that will be used and will be successful, it's business success that we're aiming for. We don't want our current or future businesses to come to town and fail.
So I've switched to challenges.
Challenges. I was still on vision.
No, we're good. I think we're
I was
good.
kind of, okay, thanks. So what would help? Well, a simple thing is a sense of place. We all know town centers that have a real sense of, okay, now you're in this special town center. Sherborn really doesn't have that. It's a visual experience that we're kind of lacking. And access to businesses is difficult, as we just said. And expansion or improvement of some businesses are limited by the water and septic constraints, of course. But we have to be creative in working within those parameters. So the recommendations are,
Yep.
First, hit it once more. Oh, no, you got it. That's good, great. I think you might have a previous version because I think we rewrote this a bit. But anyway, we want to explore the market opportunities and the costs and benefits of the current business and any new business especially, or improvements in the town center. We want to know that whatever change is made is better than what we already have. If it's not, then we stick with what we already have. That's the idea behind this recommendation. So we want to work with existing businesses and residents that live in town center to understand their goals and interests and their needs. We want to estimate the costs and financial impact of the actions, any actions that are taken.
John, the third one?
No, not yet. This is all for part of the first.
Yeah.
As a return on investment for the business and as a advantage to town's finances. We have to look at both the business side and the town finance side. So the second recommendation is more simple. Make the town center more visually appealing. How could we do that? Well, these are the ideas that came forward out of the working groups. The signage policy could be not draconian, but at least make a signage standard that gives you a sense of, okay, now you're in Sherborn, signs sort of look like this, maybe 2 granite posts or something more or less that defines the town. Plantings. The plantings in front of the little strip are very nice, but we could use more of that. The readability of town center signage. The signage readability is sort of all over the place in town centers. Some are readable, some are not. Setback requirements. We might take a look or make special exceptions to give a building more visual appeal if something new is being built. And we want to keep it consistent with the New England Village feel because that's one of our guiding principles. The third recommendation is to maximize accessibility to businesses while minimizing driving. We talked about left turns, that's a problem, we understand. But a town-wide parking plan, getting back to parking, might make businesses more accessible and walkable. Coordinate that with walkway design, so where you park, it's a pleasant walk to where you want to go. And a community parking solution may be required. That is, right now, each building or business has their own parking spots, and they're all calculated, but there may be some sharing that would work very well and that would make parking more efficient. And then addressing the current and potential water and sewer needs of individual properties. Even in the absence of a total town-wide system, there are specific technologies that might be used, such as composting toilets, gray water systems, and alternative septic technologies. And this, of course, would be under the constraints of the Board of Health, and how they decide is feasible to do that is really up to Board of Health because our water quality is paramount. But we might, within Board of Health regulations, be able to add more restaurants, more housing. The next recommendation is to enable the viable businesses that we want and the desired housing options, presuming that the town wants these things, to the extent that we can, given the current well and septic technology. It makes sense to us to extend the town center zoning district to the, okay, it's kind of gone to sleep, sorry. Let's see if I had a zoning map. Anyway, right now, the town center zoning business does not go all the way up to Hunting Lane, and we should consider bringing it up to Hunting Lane. And on the other side, perhaps up to the split to Pine Hill, the Pine Hill Road. We should take another look at the planned unit development zoning, which is zoning that allows you to make mixed business and housing use of land adjacent to town center within a certain distance. We might allow slightly larger square footage to let, restaurants and other things that we want come in. We would need to revise our zoning laws if we want to have mixed use or multi-dwelling housing options in the business or the PUD zones. And then we would want historic structures to be repurposed rather than torn down in return for, allow businesses and housing or mixed use in return for preservation of their exterior appearance. And then finally, we could consider at least, changing certain of the zoning restrictions that make it difficult for businesses to do well in Sherborn. For example, Josh mentioned outdoor events or music. Right now, our zoning law is extremely restrictive. Actually, up till 2 years ago, we allowed no outdoor music whatsoever on any restaurant. If you were on the ball field, you could have a music festival, but not outside of a restaurant. Kind of makes no sense. and it limits the ability of restaurants to survive here. Right now, it's extremely limited. We think that should change. The parking restrictions are such that you have to provide a certain amount of parking spaces for every seat of a restaurant or for every unit of housing. We might soften those so that we make better use of our housing space and have less asphalt in town center. The signage, right now there's a very strict size and location restriction, but nothing is said about style. So we should take a look at signage all over again and see if we can help businesses in that way. And then frontage and lot size. Right now, we require a large setback from the road for businesses, and that could be reduced if it's in line with our vision of what we want the town center to look like and in line with a small village scale. So those are the major suggestions we have, at least to consider, for improving the business environment and housing options in town center.
Comments, questions? Yeah, Lanny?
Well, I'm curious, does the planning board have any experience with people, business owners, coming wanting to build in Sherborn that you've had to reject because of any of these, or do you assume that these business owners know in advance that it's not a friendly town and therefore they don't even come forward? I mean, is there experience? I mean, you're doing a lot here to prepare the groundwork to be more congenial to business, but whether that's going to work or not, sounds like a pretty good expense you're putting in before you know what's going to happen, and zoning changes, and building changes, and several other things. Is there an experience with businesses being rejected by the planning board?
But not by the, well, the answer is yes. But for, in both examples, but I think it's not that, I can't think of cases where a business has gone to the point of coming to the planning board with a plan that gets rejected. I think it's really, as they come to the town to look at what can be done, they see what the constraints are, and that's where the rejection occurs.
There have been rejections for uses actually by the Board of Health. The planning board would never reject based on septic. The Board of Health would reject on septic. The Potholes Property Act would propose different uses. And I think they didn't want to put a restaurant in the spa, but that got rejected for purposes. So, I mean, that and just the general knowledge of it, I think it's actually quite prevalent.
Right. Yeah. Susie?
I think D needs to be reworded to say what Marion said, which is that the Board of Health regulations have to be primary. And so if you said instead of study Board of Health regulation options, if you said encourage and support the Board of Health studying regulation options, that I think is a much better emphasis for where you're going, because as Marion said, if that's primary, anything else has to follow. If we don't have potable water.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Susie. In fact, when I read this today, I thought, oh, that looks like the planning board is studying.
It looks like
It wa-
you're doing
yeah.
it, or the town's doing
No,
it.
and that's definitely the
not
Board
right.
of Health.
The
does it.
people who can do it are the Board of Health.
Good
timing.
suggestions. Bob?
Bob Delaney, 46 Pleasant Street. In regard to two things. One, the previous question about whether we've actually had people coming in to the planning board. I don't think businesses are likely to, if they investigate what the requirements are in town, they're just going to look and say, you know, why do I need to go here? I don't want to spend a year or more getting approvals when they're not already done. But my point in standing up was the existing town center. Just to the north of that, on North Main Street, the entrance to, I believe it's the town forest, which looks like an overgrown jungle. I stood up at the selectmen's meeting about 2 years ago to complain about that. And I was told that that was going to be cleaned out, and it looks like a mess. I mean, it's really unattractive. And, you know, people, I mean, that's one of the ways, the primary way people come into town. And if you drive around greater Boston or west of Boston towns, the entrance to the town are really pretty attractive as a rule. And Sherborn doesn't. And that's one thing that could be pretty simple, just by cleaning out that one lot that where we walk in. I mean, it's just an overgrown, whatever, unattractive and discouraging to people who might want to look at the town.
Okay.
Bob, can you explain where you're talking about?
On North Main Street, the entrance to the town forest.
Are you talking about the entrance?
No, I mean,
Yes.
south of Dowses.
Yes, you're talking about the entrance.
So you're on the west side?
Yes.
It's the Bay Circuit Trail.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. No, it's a mess. Yeah, it needs to be
The
cleaned
trail is
up.
mowed, but
And the trail is a big attraction, but you can't even see that it's there.
And it's
Yeah.
ugly to move.
Tom,
Tom Ermston, Hollis Street. I'd like to pick up on Eric's point about the fire station. If that fire station was somehow moved, let's see, in the DP garage or somewhere else on public land that we might arrange for, that would in fact open up a big space for a lot of different things. So, and the fire station has got some major structural problems that might suggest to somebody that, okay, just tear it down and let's start again.
Long-range planning.
I would urge the planning board to consider that as in its plan. Maybe it's not a plan as such, it's very specific, but that space could be a very nice anchor for this section of the town center. And if it was made attractive, that would be a major plus for enhancing the town. So I would urge you to consider that as something that should be mentioned in the town report.
okay.
Although that would be an incredible expense, just to open a space. I mean, better to go across the street and hope that he retires or something and sells that building and have, I mean, the idea of tearing down the fire station and building another one, we're talking several $1 million. I mean, it's not a joke if we're worried about a tax rate, just on the speculation that that's going to attract businesses.
Well, you wouldn't have to tear it down. You could actually do an RFP, you could actually dispense the property and actually be revenue generating.
Well, if it's structurally unsound, I don't know that we want to do that. It's
Well-
practically new. Is it truly structurally unsound?
It's structurally odd, I'll say that.
Structurally, well, odd, that's different.
No, it's got some problems.
Yeah. Robert,
Robert Johnson, 272 Western Avenue. I don't know of any structural problems with the fire station #1, and if there were some, I think I might know about it.
you've been in there before?
I'm a structural engineer.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Clarify.
Other comments? We'll move on to goal 4. Addie Mae, you want to, can you see the screen from there?
See. I had it right in front of me here. So goals 1, 2, and 3, again, this is a general plan, and the whole purpose of the general plan is to have a 30-year vision. Nothing in here is done on its own. These are ideas in 1, 2, and 3. A lot of them are ideas that focus on what can we do with our existing infrastructure creatively to bring more vitality. Not necessarily saying that we're looking to have a boom of a whole bunch of new businesses. It was mostly what can we do to make what we have stay the way the things that are good, let's keep them good and keep them vital and vibrant, and things that can maybe be done to make them better. Yeah, the creative ideas that are in here from under the recreation side, under goal 2, such as, maybe the ballparks have compostable toilets. There's all ideas. So again, 1, 2, and 3 there's ideas. There's a lot of things that it's a roadmap for the town. And goal 4 talks about, okay, we've got 1, 2, and 3. We've done what we can to encourage business, and we are realizing maybe we're not meeting the social needs that people want for a town, or we're not meeting whatever need. By the time we get to goal 4, we're saying, okay, we've exhausted what we can do with 1, 2, and 3 with our existing infrastructure, we think. So goal 4 says, develop a realistic, comprehensive, long-term plan for the town center that addresses challenges selected for action within goal 1, 2, and 3, but we've not been able to meet because of the infrastructure. And it says, let's have a clear plan. So goal 4 says, okay, before we even get to that next step, we need to look at, let's have a clear plan of where we want to go, what do we want to preserve, and what needs to change, and we want to encourage the social and economic vitality, but the two go hand in hand. As it's been noted, we're not looking to have a bunch of big box stores. No one's ever saying that. People are looking for town centers to be places for meeting and for experiences and for that connection to place. So sustain the social and economic vitality and contribute to the fiscal stability of the town and property values throughout Sherborn. And there's the challenges. The challenges at that point says that maybe we haven't been able to achieve what we want under 1, 2, and 3. We're looking and saying there's still perhaps a lack of socially and economic vibrant town center that would diminish Sherborn's ability to attract buyers, that would keep up our property values. These are all potential challenges. Nobody's saying this is actual. Again, the general plan being a bunch of, this is a product of many years of discussions and working groups and surveys. Sherborn residents have differing opinions of desirable future changes in a town center. And this is something all of us here in this room can attest to. We've all got different ideas. And so the challenge is, how do we come together to make sure we're on the same page to the best of anyone's ability? Whether the types of additional small businesses desired by many Sherborn residents are economically viable in a town center is not known. And currently there's insufficient data to evaluate the potential impacts of town center water and sewer systems on a town center development or town finances. And that's basically the number one issue, that we still don't have enough data to know what would be the impact financially to go that next step if it's decided that we can't get where we want to as a town within the 30-year plan. This is not happening tomorrow. We're going through 1, 2, and 3 first. There's a fear that a common water supply for a limited town center district will not be legally defensible and will open the floodgates of unwanted and uncontrolled development. And the fiscal implications for the town of adding specific business or housing options to the town center have not been calculated. So then we go to the recommendations, and the recommendations, I have a feeling there's going to be quite a bit of discussion at this point, but the recommendations really do center. We've tried to take a lot of feedback from the July forum that focuses on the need to develop a shared vision of the ideal future town center. And this includes desired improvements and changes that are acceptable to most Sherborn residents. And so part of getting there will be more outreach campaigns, more visioning, working groups, more surveys. Again, planning board is not doing anything unilaterally. It's going to be a result of the town center, and the general plan is helping us make sure we have a place where these ideas are recorded so that we are not spending a lot of time in a meeting group saying, well, what are our challenges? So we're starting with, okay, we know here's challenges, and then we can move to the next step. B is analyze contributions of specific business types and housing options deemed desirable, and then invest in market analysis and say, okay, we think we want this type of housing in our town center, but we need a market analysis to decide, is that really viable? Collecting data to know what, say we want this type of store and right now it's not possible. Well, is it really financially feasible? Is it viable market? And basically doing market trends, doing analysis on impacts on taxes and property. So goal 4 really says, okay, if we're going to think about jumping to that next infrastructure step, we really need to know what that means. What are pitfalls? What is that? How does that really impact us financially? Evaluate the financing options for public water, strictly limited in town center, making a decision whether or not to proceed with this infrastructure. So again, as I said, all of goal 4 is a very detailed way of trying to lay out all the things that we would want to make sure we considered. It's saying, here's the cautionary, here's the challenges, here's some recommendations of what we want to make sure we don't leave out. So.
Okay. So it really says do a market study.
Right.
Comments, questions? Susie?
I think you've hit on the number one, and that is that we do have differing visions. And I think that's true in the broader community. I think it's true in the US. I think it's a problem when you're trying to zero in on what do we do going forward. And I think the difficulty with a lot of the things that you're talking about is that you don't balance the pluses with the minuses. I think people don't need to really understand what the costs are, and I don't mean just the dollars. I mean, if you're gonna say I would like this in that spot, you need to understand. As a general rule, people need to be educated to understand what that means, and I think that that's a very difficult thing to do. And I think but the onus is on your shoulders to do it in order that what you do will have validity going forward.
Well, can I just respond to that a bit? That's well said, Susie. And I think we have to remember how things actually play out. That is, yeah, we're never going to all agree on the details of a single vision, but as we saw in putting together the guiding principles and then the major goals, we can agree on the big picture. And how things actually play out over time is not controlled by us largely. Projects come in one at a time. Properties are owned by single landowners. We take things one at a time. But we go back and check that we're not doing anything that is going to, be contrary to our guiding principles and be contrary to what the majority of people in the town really want. So, that's, I think, the best we can do.
Robert?
A general sort of thing. A while ago, I was at a meeting where they were talking about housing. And one of the things the experts had come up with was a prediction for the future population of the town. And I was amazed that they were predicting that the town would actually decrease in population. I think we need to keep that in mind when we're looking at growth. Because, I don't know if their figures are correct, but I certainly don't have any numbers of my own.
Right.
And if they are correct, then I think that we as a community need to keep that in mind when we're looking at the future.
Yeah. Well said. The I know the numbers you're talking about, saying Sherborn and communities like Sherborn that are not on major public transportation spokes going into the urban area, cities are growing like crazy. And so the communities now that are on those spokes that access the city well, they're growing. But towns like ours that are not on a spoke are forecasted to age and shrink. This year, there's a few sort of market indicators. I think in March, Ford Motor Company said, oh my gosh, millennials are buying large SUVs much more than we expected. They're starting to behave like their parents. Not a giant change. Millennials don't panic. But the next generation that's so different, that's all rushing to the cities, some of them are actually starting to behave more like their parents. Now, my generation, that never occurred. But so that was one thing. That was a little market tickler. The next was that they're actually saying in terms of real estate that millennials are moving, and we've seen it. We've got members on our board, on the planning board. We know we've got new folks in town, so we've seen the millennial generation finding Sherborn slowly. I think we're certainly much slower to recover from 2008 compared to Natick that's on a spoke. So I think that's a real market indicator. The next thing is, and it's multiple facets, but multiple influences. Certainly Amazon is changing how people shop. Malls are expected to decrease by 20% and things like that. But combined with the gentle, careful sort of rediscovery of towns like ours, there's also the other part of millennials not changing. They really do want they want social meeting places. They prefer towns that have vibrant town centers. They want places to meet. And I will say that 2 years ago, the Built Environment Working Group kept saying, we want Sherborn, if we have a chance, if things are changing anyway, let's guide it in the direction of the town center being more vibrant and have more places to interact and more little places to sit and talk and things like that. So I was probably one of the, I don't think that's really happening because all the data says we're going to age and maybe I was feeling my age too. But the Built Environment Group nailed it. They did they said just what they're saying is now happening. The towns with more vibrant town centers are going to be more popular, and the more people that are interested in Sherborn, so that we don't shrink, so the property values go up. That's all good. So there's other aspects to it, but I completely agree. This has got to, the whole purpose of Goal 4 and really Goal 5 is to do this carefully, make the decisions, yes, no. Do we want to do things that are not able to be done within the first 3 goals? That's a key decision. Addie Mae and then Grace.
I just wanted to say that as far as this general plan, I mean, it's been pretty dry discussion this evening, but Goal 2 and 3 are actually kind of exciting, and it's, like I said, it's a lot of the ways, what can we do within our infrastructure? It's the non-controversial, for the most part. It's the things such as Josh Ziskin had mentioned from Heritage, that there's little things that we can do to make what we have really great. In the 2 years, or in a year that we were without, when the inn closed and the Heritage was in a transition period and we had no place to go and meet up, and it was felt by many of us in town. And that's important that we keep that going and we find ways such as, let's look at, it's kind of crazy that you can't have a wedding and have outdoor music the way our bylaws are written. So there's a lot of little things that we can do that are that are positive and are community building and not really that divisive, that we can work on. And these ideas of, making trails link and finding ways for kids to get to friends' houses without having to be in main streets through trails and networks. And that's what's in goals 2 and 3, a lot of that. And those are, I really hope that everyone will take a chance of looking at those and not being so off-put by goal 4 and 5. The discussion gets launched into something that's, so financially based.
Grace?
I sense that there's an issue of time involved in this. I'm really struck by the fact that 1 through 3 should, as Addie said, are exciting and should not be controversial because they are very conservative. They want to just add around the edges to make this play. It's a series of perfecting goals. 4 and 5 will require time to pass before you know that they're even needed. And if they're still wanted and needed after the research and data, there'll be a lots better sense of what the future of our town is. So I think it all works very well as a package. I think the hard work that you guys have done dividing it up into this is what we have, let's perfect it, and then see if we need more is exactly the right way to go.
Bob?
I guess I've looked through this, and I will first say that I'm very appreciative of all the work that's been put into it. You guys, especially Marion and Eddie May, have done a lot of work on this, and that's not lost on me, and I'm sure it's not lost on a lot of other folks. So thank you very much. I kind of agree with what's been said, that 1 through 3 are certainly more realistic in the short term. Would I like to see 4 and 5 move forward? Absolutely. I think most people in this room know that. Because I think there are some long-term financial viability issues if we don't think about 4 and 5. But all in all, I'm in favor of generally everything I've seen in this plan. My concern, and you all have heard it from me before, these are all great ideas, but we're going to be sitting here in 30 years in the same place if we don't have our regulatory environment move into the 21st century. And I'm not just talking about the actual rules. And I think there are issues with the actual rules, and we won't get into those tonight, but they're relevant to this big conversation, okay? But 75% of my issue with the regulatory environment is we need to have private investment to make these goals happen. We don't have the money to do this. God knows our tax rate is beyond what's sustainable now. We don't have the money to do these things. We need private investment. If you're going to have private investment, you don't have to go crazy and give developers or other people or private owners everything they need, but you need to be willing to talk with them and articulate the town's needs and work with them so they invest money in our community. And I think that's the only way we're going to do it. And, that when people, I've watched this, not only myself, but other people invest money in this town in recent years, and they get attacked. And it's a very, very hard place to want to make an investment. And I hope that when we consider the general plan, that we can consider those issues as being terribly, terribly important, because you can pass this plan, but if you're going to achieve it, we have got to change our regulatory environment. It's got to be in the 21st century. It's got to be based on 21st century science. It's got to be based on 21st century information and on 21st century kind of decency of communication with each other and with people who want to make investments. And I think that's critical that be role. I know it's hard for all of us to have these conversations. We've had a lot of difficult conversations about this. But it's not a topic that's going to go away, and this plan can't live in isolation. of those challenges. So thank you.
Okay. Others? I think we're on the home stretch here. Really, 5 got edited quite a bit. When you look at 5 in your section here, work toward the implementation of the comprehensive plan for the town center. Sherborn will attain its goal of a small, vibrant town center with successful small businesses and diverse housing options that contribute to the financial stability of the town. Not much different than 4. The challenges that are spelled out here, current zoning bylaws don't adequately address the business and housing alternatives that would be enabled by the town center water and sewer. So if there was water and sewer utilities and/or utilities, the current bylaws would need to be changed to address that infrastructure change. And there's no strategy to attract the businesses and housing developments. Those are challenges. They're really part of 4. And then the recommendations, revised bylaws and regulations. Bob, that speaks to some of what you're talking about. I think really, I made a note here that we need to make sure in the plan we sort of cross-reference in the zoning discussion, we cross-reference just our bylaws and regulatory issues throughout the plan so we can see where they are and understand the decisions of protecting our environment, encouraging business, and everything else in between. The guiding principles are we really got to think long-term. And so that's important in tax rate, it's important in our precious drinking water, it's important in preserving open space. It's the long-term that I think we really need to keep that in mind. So 5 is addressing that, I guess, in that way. If there's a town center water system, that, hey, take advantage of something that was in past plans, and I'd sure like to see it somehow, but consistently the town says, I'm not paying for it, is to bury the power lines, but gosh, wouldn't it look nice? Work with property owners and business owners and developers to enable desirable changes. So I think that's, it doesn't go without saying, it goes with being said, but in the Sherborn Business Association, at the representatives of previous meetings and input have made that clear. And it goes back to, Lanny, I think it goes back to your question about, so has anybody come to the town and been rejected and things like that? Those are the questions I think that go into a real good market study saying what's doable and what's achievable. And then ensure that the change in the town center is in harmony with the rest of the town, with the overall town character and the village, the reason we're here. I mean, we all chose to be here with the town center the way it is. Now we're saying we want to preserve, it's important to preserve key parts of that. We're saying it's important to look for ways to guide change. So that's the recommendations of 5. I think it really is an extension of 4, but together those are the recommendations there. Any further comments? Yes.
I'm wondering, are we worried that Sherborn is going to get left behind somehow? That we're going to lose residents and that the town is somehow going to be left behind? Because as far as I'm concerned, we have a lovely little town center right now. And is it a given that we have to add housing downtown Sherborn? If we extend the zoning down to Hunting Lane, is it a given that we have to put housing in? Can we have some kind of businesses? Do we have to have housing?
No, we don't have to have housing, but I think to your question about, sort of 2 parts to your question, One is, is Sherborn sustainable? We're certainly on a path that says our property values are depressed and our recovery, real estate values are slow to recover, certainly compared to other towns. And that's, our tax rate's got a lot to do with that.
Yeah, but I think in the long run, I think it'll come around. I think it'll come around.
Yeah,
In the long run, we'll.
not everybody does. I mean, but you're asking the right, we can, that's something the town has been wrestling with and needs to wrestle with. But you're not alone.
My belief is that we should put a low-income housing project development right where that house is, down toward Hunting Lane, and completely satisfy our 40B requirements with low-income housing, and then we don't have to worry about developers coming in and developing our town in ways like Whitney Farm, which is an absolute disaster.
It's doing pretty well now.
What?
It's picking up, but yeah, Whitney Farm is not a great example of a good development, that's for sure. I think Tom, then Lanny.
Obviously, there's been a lot of good work that's going on, and I think we all appreciate the effort of your various committees. And sooner or later, the rubber will meet the road when the town accepts the report, and then we'll look at the recommendations and realize that a lot of it requires private money and maybe some public money. I hope that in the report, and we all know that, let me back up, there have been general plans over the decades, and some of these sentiments that we see here today are echoes of thoughts reflected in those reports. So I think recognizing that not everybody's going to read through the general report is, you might want to have an executive summary that it reviews a little bit of the 50 years. I don't know whether you're planning to do this or not. And what are the half a dozen major departures of your town plan to really generate some interest on the part of the taxpayer in town, and to get them to read, if not the whole thing, certain sections that they might have an interest in.
You wound me, but your point is well taken.
Actually,
Lanny.
we have an executive summary built into the new plan.
Yeah.
It's not all written yet, but it's going to be there.
Yeah.
Well, I peppered throughout this whole report of statements like, current zoning bylaws do not adequately address the business and housing alternatives that are desired by most residents and that would be enabled by town center water and sewer. I really think that and there are a few of these preferred by most residents. Well, in the 2008 survey of residents, if paying taxes for the water were included, there were only 26% in favor and 53% opposed. And the idea of additional, and I'm quoting from your report, the idea of additional residential development in or near the town center attracted only 25% support, and only 36% were in favor if housing was restricted to persons 55 and older. The idea of having affordable housing in near the town center mustered a less than enthusiastic 33%. So I mean, I think you have a bias. I think the planning board, or many members of it, have a bias on this question, and it's really reflected in this report and the committee that wrote it. And I really, it just seems to me that's what the evidence shows, and yet the people who, want development, want the water, I mean, maybe the town meeting will be the ultimate referendum, whether there's a proposal that has to do with the water, they vote for it or against it, and that's it. Because I think we could discuss this forever and not get to the point of what the town consensus really is. I don't think we know it, and I think this whole thing depends on it, and maybe that'll be the moment of truth. That's, I think in the meantime, we're just treading water.
It's going to
so
sound
speak.
weird, Lanny, but I agree with you.
I agree too, and one of the reasons that there's so many differing opinions, and the survey may or may not support things, is partly that we didn't and still don't have all the information we need to make a intelligent decision on town. If you're focusing on town water and sewer, we don't have the information we need. We're working on getting it. Once we get it, then we can present the data to the town, present the evidence, present the facts, not alternative facts, real facts.
But desired by most residents is a very strong statement.
Is that a statement based on the 2014 survey?
No, that was a much more confusing survey in terms of.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was,
straightforward.
right, it was
It did
confusing.
not
No,
explain
No,
the cost.
Yeah.
it was
It didn't deal
too
with the
foggy.
cost.
We'll make a note of that wording and see if we can make it better.
Sorry, I don't,
Kevin Cole, 19.
Kevin and then Bob and then,
So I think, I just got a question, I guess, sort of. We keep talking about a town water supply, but there's no dry wells in the center of town, right? Everybody's wells are functioning well, I mean, yours are, right? I mean, so there's no lack of water if you want to drill a well. A public water supply would be pressurized, it could be fed throughout the town, and that's what everybody's worried about. However, a septic system is gravity fed, which would require lift stations and pump stations in order to get it to a septic system. So has any thought been given to a large-scale septic system to be installed, say, like under the ball fields or something like that? I mean,
Yes.
yeah.
then you have a set capacity that limits the amount of development, and people can't just glom onto it, clam onto it, or whatever, you know what I mean? So.
Yeah, there's a town center options committee that's worked partway through that, and we think the recommendations here are to work through this, and then, as Lanny says, make a decision, the town makes a decision to progress further, to get the more detailed analysis of those two options or variations of that. And then the town would make that decision with that good information. We're saying we need good information for that. I forget who was next. Bob?
Yeah, I was just going to, a quick comment about what Lanny said, and that is, I agree with the second part of what he said, which is that, we're a democracy, and this plan will go to town meeting, and the town will vote it up and down, and I'm going to be more in favor of that. I would caution on his first comment that answers to questions in 2008, I'll point out that we elected Barack Obama in 2008, and about 6 months ago, we elected somebody kind of different.
Well, it shows we had
So-
better judgment in 2008.
I think you get my point, which is, this is not 2008, and I think we need to let the voters speak on this plan, and I am hopeful that they will see the wisdom in it.
Yeah, the environment's certainly very different. And then Eric?
I guess just mirroring keeping what Bob said is, I know about the 2008 survey, and I think Lenny picked certain aspects of it, but if you look at the actual question you asked about supporting water supply if paid for by the users, the actual majority actually supported such a thing there. So I think it's important for you to look at both surveys, realize that, and then take that, you can actually talk about and reference the survey when you say most people want it or whatever else. Because another thing I remember about 2008 is when you actually did the demographics of the age breakdown, it actually was the younger generation that actually wanted the actual more downtown amenities and so on like that. So I thought that was very telling about the 2008 survey, and that should be referenced. So I agree with Lenny in that sense, it should be referenced. And just as he looks like he picked and chose which ones he wanted, you shouldn't pick and choose. Look at the survey as a whole, look at the 2014 survey, and take that holistically and take that as the initial voice and present that to town meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Okay. Well, I think, thank you. Again, this has been really helpful, a lot of really good feedback, and we all benefit from it. So thank you all for being here. Remember to put your feedback forms, I guess, on this table here. And if you're watching this at home, I think there's instructions on you, but send it to the planning board. We really like the feedback we've gotten here. If you have more thoughts, we want to hear it. There's a lot of people that have come to this and other meetings, and I think we're all extremely appreciative. We've met with a lot of other boards and committees and groups, and the wisdom and dedication, I think, of everyone has been extremely valuable. I also want to thank my fellow planning board members, and I particularly want to thank Marion Neutra for a tremendous amount of work. I know the whole board is very appreciative. Gina, we have, this is an open planning board meeting, and are there other actions or items we need to consider? Otherwise, I'll make a motion to
John?
close the meeting.
I just wanted to say something. Daryl, whom I respect enormously for her dedication and her knowledge,
There's nothing else.
there was a challenge thrown down in sections 1, 2, and 3 to the Board of Health, actually. And this is how I read it. The conservative thought is, let's make the most of the potential capacity of our town center. There are lots of things in sections 1 through 3 to improve it, but one of the things is, let's make the most of our septic capacity so that Frosties can have a whole bathroom for the public, that sort of thing. And the challenge was, within the constraint of scientific validities, because we all want to protect our water, are there things that the Board of Health can explore that would actually expand the potential for town center? Because if we're talking in terms of the viability of our businesses and perhaps some growth, because we think there are people who want more services of certain sorts, that gets us into this whole fraught thing of, do we want to have a shared septic system, which I personally think is more important than a water system, but that's a personal comment. But if we could create more opportunity without doing that, everybody would be happy, but only if it's safe. Is that a challenge that can be accepted by the Board of Health?
I would say most of what we see downtown, because there are existing properties all over.
Yes, we know that.
So anytime something comes up to upgrade, replace, repair a system, we give as many variances as are needed to accommodate that. What we've seen being more limiting is really any kind of state requirements. And I'll use just one example, personal pet peeve of my own. Rose's Garage was required to put in a system that was several times, many times,
Yes.
the amount of wastewater that they generate. But that was a state-driven requirement based on square footage and assumptions about how it might operate and provisions for that. So while we might, and the board at that time tried to argue that they should not be required to do that, and it was actually detrimental to the performance of the system to have it underutilized to the extent that it was.
That's bizarre.
But that's out of our hands.
I realize that.
And I would say for most of the things downtown, again, they're existing. So again, it's not, we don't have, most of our regulations in town are state-based. And so.
I wasn't referring to regulations.
But I would agree with you. I think that a centralized wastewater system opens up more opportunities, I believe, than the water.
Yeah, I was. My question was more centered on there any new technologies out there that.
Again, that we are not the Sherborn Board of Health cannot authorize those.
So is it the
That's a
state that has,
state level. And I would say that if people were, again, this is sometimes a behavioral thing, so, and I'm springboarding way beyond what Board of Health is authorized to do. But I think we're seeing the constraints on resources as populations grow. And so if we used water differently, if we regulated or behaved in ways that didn't introduce contaminants into that water that are difficult to treat or deal with, if we're willing to have food or other things grown in our effluent because it was cleaner, then you start having all sorts of different opportunities, but that's not where the regulations are, because
That's not what?
That's not where this Title V regulations are, because they're aiming for the lowest common denominator, and they're building in for things saying that people are going to put things that they shouldn't be doing, or they might use more water than they should use, or could get away with.
so you feel the opportunities are very limited? I'm sorry.
So it's beyond us. There are some things about the composting toilets open up opportunities for greatly reduced size. Gray water systems can do the same kind of thing. But people never want composting toilets.
What?
And they're not bad, they're modern, they function better. But that's the kind of thing that I see as more the challenge. So we're a bit hemmed in.
Thank you. Bob?
Not surprisingly, I simply disagree with what Daryl just said. The constraints, as you asked the question, the constraints do not relate to Title V constraints. They relate to local constraints. The most obvious one is the required natural separation to groundwater. This is something that a lot of us in the room understand this concept.
Right.
And that is, and it's some people talk about it allowing mounded systems. Well, it's really, a mounded system is not the issue, it's the natural separation. It is a local regulation, and if we allowed mounded systems, there would be much less constraint in downtown. And this is something that all other communities allow.
I didn't mean to start that kind of
I
conversation. I
I
was
just couldn't listen to the answer without putting out what I think is the correct
Okay,
answer.
'cause I was really focusing. I meant what I said. I wonder if science out there can help us. I don't want to get.
Mounded systems are scientific, I can assure
Okay.
you all.
Jeez.
So,
There's nothing else on the agenda. This was concentrating this. I did have a couple of administrative things to bring up.
okay.
I've posted the hearing on the articles for special town meeting for October 30th, like you had decided.
Uh-huh.
The actual articles, I can send them to you, and maybe you could take a look at it on Friday. I mean, all it is the EA, changing the EA to eliminate the 1 mile limit, and add a third category for, right now we have affordable and elderly separate, and this one would allow elderly affordable, or I should say age-restricted affordable.
Okay.
And,
So added to our Friday agenda?
yes, and then which I've also posted.
Is that different
With that
than
on there, by the way.
Is that different than the copy that you gave us before?
It's slightly different, yes,
Okay.
because of the comments that I got from that copy. So it incorporated that copy. And a couple of people had asked about talking about the proposal on Coolidge Street. The hearing is scheduled for for the 30th. We do have another meeting on the 17th. That one is also the Eversource tree hearing. So I didn't know if we wanted to entertain comments that relate to the public hearing on the 30th, on the 17th, or if we should have them present them on the 30th at the public hearing.
Or I'd say present them on the 30th. I don't know what the board thinks.
I think I'd like to have at least a chance before the 30th to hear more about the Coolidge Street properties. And I would tentatively propose that we think about a way to make the tree hearing as efficient as we can so that it doesn't take a huge amount of time because we have so much on our plate right now.
A lot to go through.
So that we could possibly address both on the 17th if there's
And
time.
let's put it, then if there aren't other comments, I'd say, then put it on the agenda on the 17th.
Okay.
And we'll
And we'll try.
Can always
do our
be
best job to estimate the time.
If it runs too late or something, it can always be deferred to the 30th, so
Okay.
at least we can put it on the agenda.
Anything else?
That's it.
So there's a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Further discussion. Grace?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you again, everybody.